What's going on, guys? The halving is only about 2 days away, under 2 days away now, and we're seeing a little Bitcoin recovery here, a little recovery for Bitcoin and related assets. Some of the miners are up double digits. In this video, I'm going to show you a couple levels to watch for on the chart. We also have a new commercial for an ETF provider, Hashdex. Let's take a look. Sorry if the quality sucked there, but we're going to continue to see this. Continue to see these companies fighting for your dollars in Bitcoin. We're going to continue to see these other spot Bitcoin ETFs grow and soon outpace Gbtc. And Ibit is only around 2 billion away, and we'll look at that in a little bit. But soon after Ibit flips Gbtc, I do believe throughout 2024 we will eventually see others flip Gbtc. Now I want to show you Bitcoin. We're still following this downtrend. We're finding resistance on this descending resistance line here. Keep an eye on that line, watch for a breakout and maybe a retest and a bounce. Otherwise, this sell-off might continue for both Bitcoin and the Bitcoin miners. If we do find resistance on this descending resistance line, start heading back down, watch for this break of 61,000. Next, watch for a break of our recent low, this roughly 59.7 area. And I'm no expert with Fib, but looking at the Fibonacci retracement, when we started this beginning of this rally, once we changed momentum, on this retrace from the top, we're right here near that golden pocket. We nearly touched that golden pocket. And just because the halving's only a few days away doesn't mean necessarily that right after the halving, everything's just going to go on a huge rally. But overall, the halving is a huge positive for this year. And it'll be very interesting to see. This is the first Bitcoin halving where we have these huge spot ETFs, huge buying pressure. And we'll see soon how much the spot Bitcoin ETFs, once we start seeing good inflows, how much is this going to push up the price now that there's only going to be 450 Bitcoin per day issued versus 900? It's the simplest mechanic in economics, supply and demand. If incoming supply decreases, as long as demand is constant, price will rise. Now, I also want to show you guys Clsk. This is one miner that's doing quite well. There are very few that are doing better than it today. SDIG being one of them. But looking at Clsk, we saw a break out of this descending channel, which is great. And now we're finding resistance on the 50 MA. Keep an eye on the 50 MA, see if we can break out of this. I think today we won't. We're probably finding resistance on it, and we might start pulling back as we get to the halving. Might see fear after the halving. Might be one last little flush, one last little shakeout, and you have to be taking advantage of it. And the proof of that is days like this, where we see these huge recovery days. We will see days like this. There will be many days like this throughout 2024. The market definitely sees the Bitcoin halving as a huge negative for the miners. In reality, it's a positive if you look throughout the rest of this year. And I've said before, I expect a lot of the miners here to be profitable shortly after the halving. Some even right after the halving. A stock like Clsk could see profitability after the halving takes effect. In reality, we're still in April. This is the first month of the next upcoming quarter that's going to be reported. January, February, and March is about to be reported here in a couple of weeks, and Clsk does expect profitability. But in the next quarter, going over April, May, and June, I do expect we might see profitability, especially if Bitcoin can start gaining some momentum, start pushing back to those all-time highs. We might see consistent profitability for a stock like Clsk, who just saw profitability in the last quarter, is likely to see profitability in the upcoming earnings, and may even see profitability after the halving has taken effect, as long as Bitcoin keeps some upward momentum throughout the next couple of months. And I've been saying this, of course I can be wrong, I'm not trying to say I'm going to be 100% right, but this is just my opinion that, we might not fill this 10 to 12 gap. There are buyers that are ready to buy it up. My opinion is you have to be buying into that gap fill. My hope is that the halving, we see one final shakeout right after the halving, and the Bitcoin miners tank. This might give Clsk one last opportunity to fill that gap. If not, I don't think it's going to fill. Now, Btbt is another one I'm bullish on. I talked about this one yesterday. There's another one that's expecting earnings, a profitable quarter coming up. And I'm watching how it does here at this $2 level. it might find it as resistance today, and that could bring us to test our recent lows here at 176, 175. But a break over this support would be a huge positive. This is a pretty strong support, might turn out to be a strong resistance. I think it would be nice to see a break over this support. But it seems like the riskier the miners, the less gains we're seeing today, while the less risky miners are seeing more gains. Cleanspark, more gains, a profitable Bitcoin miner. So, for a little while, I do expect some of the higher risk miners definitely to see some fear. There is talk around about, these smaller, higher risk miners aren't going to survive, and maybe some don't, but I personally think this fear is a bit overblown. While there were miners that went bankrupt when Bitcoin went through its bear market all the way down to 15,000, there are some very high risk miners that did survive during that time. And if they survived at a time like that when Bitcoin was 15,000, I don't see why they can't survive at a $60,000 Bitcoin post halving. That's the equivalent of a $30,000 Bitcoin pre-halving. Another thing to think about with the smaller cap, higher risk miners, something like Sphere3D, for example, is there is the potential for an acquisition, which would be a positive for the stock price if a larger company is planning on acquiring a smaller, higher risk miner. Another thing to realize, is if hype does draw in, these miners are going to dilute. We've seen it already. We have been seeing it. We've seen it last cycle. We'll see it this cycle. And while this would be a short-term negative for shareholders, the positive is that they get to survive. So to me, the miners that won't survive would be miners that are stubborn and don't dilute, miners that don't see a pump on their share price. But if those two things happen, then whatever miner in question would survive. So I think the fear of less efficient miners all just going down, going away, I think that's a little unlikely. And as Bitcoin's price rallies, we'll actually probably hear about new miners entering the space. Speaking of high risk miners, Sphere3D should be reporting their mining update pretty soon. Typically it's right around the middle of the month. We haven't seen it yet, so it should be within the next couple days. And continuing on with my last thought, these higher risk miners are definitely seeing more pain. And on a day like this, Sphere3D is barely seeing a recovery while some other miners are up double digits. I still think some of these higher risk, higher reward miners have a lot of potential. A stock like Sphere3D is only like a 20-something million dollar market cap, very small market cap, hash rate over 1, which is very small, I'll admit, but you have other companies that are at a hash rate of, 10. In Cleanspark's example, 16 with a $4 billion market cap. Whereas Sphere3D mines 1/16th in terms of exahash and is like 1/40th the market cap. So from a hash rate to market cap perspective, you can't really find a better miner than Sphere3D. The thing is it's extremely high risk, so that's part of the deal. A stock like Sphere3D though, you want to be a small position. You don't want this to be your biggest miner necessarily. I do think it's very high risk, and the market agrees. From its peak, it is now down nearly 75%. From its bottom, it's only up about 84%, almost a double from the bottom. I still think there's some potential here for Sphere3D when hype draws in. When all the miners get a pump, I think Sphere3D will see some of the pump as well. The fact is, right now, it is one of the highest risk miners. We are approaching the halving, which is seen as a terrible thing for the Bitcoin miners, even though we know what's really happening over the next couple months. So, long story short, I would keep this position size small. This is one of my smaller miner positions. The higher risk you go, usually the smaller percentage of your portfolio you want to go. And in reality, they're in a much better position now than they were last cycle. Last cycle, they were hardly even a Bitcoin miner. They were more of a cloud service provider or network provider thing. And now at least they have some real revenue attached to their company. Still unprofitable, which is a pretty big negative considering where we are in the cycle. If they're not seeing profitability here, it's going to take them quite a while to see profitability as Bitcoin continues to appreciate in price, as the rewards also get cut in half. But revenue has grown substantially. A few quarters ago, this was only pulling in $1 million in revenue a quarter. Now they've pretty much 7x'd that. They pulled in 7.7 million last quarter. They're expecting to pull in 8.3 this quarter. But just to update you guys on Sphere3D, yes, I am holding, and yes, I do see it as a buy as long as your position isn't huge. Now, as for the Bitcoin halving, we only have 230 blocks to go. 99.9% of the blocks are already mined. We are almost at the halving. Now, I'm just glancing over this. I'm going to skip a couple things. It'll be down below for you, but I want to mention this here from Matthew Siegel, the head of digital assets research at Van Eck Bitcoin Trust. He agrees that the halving event will create winners and losers. Unprofitable miners will disconnect, ceding shares to those with low-cost power. We will likely see some acquisitions, yes. But here's the thing, everyone's saying these unprofitable miners will disconnect. People forget, a lot of these miners were unprofitable since 2021, since the last bull run, or not even seen profitability at all. These are the miners they're talking about that survived when Bitcoin was $15,000. These are the miners that people are talking about when we were at the most aggressive rate hike cycle in history. I personally think the fear of the unprofitable miners all disconnecting is a little overblown. When Bitcoin appreciates in value, these miners will keep online. It's a matter of how long can they survive until Bitcoin reaches that value that they can be profitable. The reality is, last cycle, a lot of these stocks pumped and they weren't profitable. There was speculation, there was hype. I do think speculation and hype will drive a lot of the riskier miners higher, and they will then be able to dilute, which, like I said, would be a short-term negative, but long-term they get to survive. Hey. But let me know what you guys think about that. Do you think these higher risk miners will see a pump? Do you think everyone will just avoid them and they will fade into obscurity? Now let's see a price outlook, and this is mentioned by Rob Chang, previous CFO of Riot, now the CEO of Griffin. Chang says Bitcoin could climb higher after the halving. Really? If the shorts turn out to be wrong, we could see a supply squeeze. Even with Bitcoin's fluctuations, it remains close to all-time highs, and the future market showing significant premiums all point to a strong confidence in Bitcoin's ongoing integration and legacy. Griffin Digital Mining believes Bitcoin will surpass 100,000 in 2024. Adding that the estimate is quite low. He noted other forecasts that projected Bitcoin to rise above 150,000, calling them entirely possible. And some of you guys might be saying this is an extremely low price target. And I kind of agree, but at the same time, you got to realize as Bitcoin's market cap grows, it's going to take a considerable more amount of money to push up that market cap. As Bitcoin's price grows, as the cost of Bitcoin grows, it's going to take more money to buy Bitcoin and eat up the supply. And as market cap grows, we will see diminishing returns. You can't see the kind of gains we saw in previous halvings. And typically what you see is, you see about 1/3 in terms of the return from the halving until the end of the rally. And I went over this in a previous video. What I expect is somewhere around a 3x from where we are at the halving. So if we're at like 60,000 by the halving, we're probably going to get to somewhere around 180. I think that's reasonable by the peak. But a price target like $500,000, I think that's a little bit early. That will probably come in the next cycle. I think that's the equivalent of last cycle when everyone was saying we're going to reach 100,000 and we reached like 70,000 almost. So just have realistic expectations. In the heat of the moment when everything's flying high, everyone starts giving these crazy price targets. Try to keep some realistic price targets in your head, and once we reach them, consider taking some profits. Consider at least trimming as we get through this bull run. But to me, now is still the time to be a buyer. Now is not yet the time to sell. Now is the time to still be loading up the bags. And keep an eye on Grayscale and Ibit. They are going to soon flip. This is going to come in a couple weeks. I expected this to come a bit sooner, but we've seen volume decrease a little bit. We've seen outflows decrease, inflows decrease. So we haven't seen as big of a range. But what we're looking at now, Grayscale is sitting at 18.8 billion in assets under management. Ibit is now sitting at 16.6 billion in assets under management. They're only a little over 2 billion away from flipping. And the halving is under 2 days away, just a little over 1 day away. You have to be taking advantage of the Bitcoin miners while they're down. You have to be taking advantage of Bitcoin while it pulls back. I don't believe prices are going to be suppressed for much longer. And the people that are saying the Bitcoin miners are about to tank after the halving, they're going to take half the rewards. Well, they might not be paying attention because many of these Bitcoin miners are down more than 50%. Some are down 70%. And my opinion is the halving is pretty much priced in at this point. I mean, it's a couple days away. Do we see a little quick downwick after the halving, a little bit of a short-term fear? It's possible. Would I see that as a buying opportunity? Hell yes. Days like these are nice. It reminds you that there are green days out there during all this red. And there will be more. We're approaching the most bullish event for Bitcoin every 4 years, and this is going to continue to be very exciting for both Bitcoin, the Bitcoin miners, and altcoins. They're going to continue going on their overall bull run. And let me know if you guys want an upcoming video about altcoins. I have been adding to some altcoins here and there. There are a couple different altcoins I like out there. Let me know if you want a video going over different altcoins. Let me know what miners you have been picking up today. And what do you think the Bitcoin halving is going to bring for the miners? Do you see a drop coming after the halving, or do you see a rally coming? I think a rally is very likely to come for the Bitcoin miners more towards May when earnings is coming out and many expect profitability. I do think it's going to be a very exciting time for both Bitcoin, the Bitcoin miners, and altcoins. Thanks as always, guys, and I'll see you on the next one.